Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Sunday Shot. Thanks for joining us. I am broadcasting from Gadigal land where finally the sun has come out, and that makes a big difference from what the last weeks, years, it seems, since water has been flowing non-stop from the sky. I am joined today by my co-host, the editor of The Shot, Dave Milner from Cooler Nation down there in Melbourne. Hello, Dave.
Good morning, Joe. How are you?
I am very well, thank you. It's nice to be in the sun,
I
which
can I can imagine.
which I haven't been since I was in lovely Larrakia country just last week in Darwin, which made for a dramatic contrast with what was going down here in Sydney. Today, joining us on the panel to talk all things politics from this week, we are delighted to welcome back Jane Caro.
Hi, everybody. I'm on Wanneroo country.
Welcome, Jane. Thanks for coming back onto the Sunday Shot and joining us for the first time from Fresh Economic Thinking think tank is Dr. Cameron Murray. Cameron, welcome.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being with us. Now, this week in politics, we saw Tasmania finally get a government that it seems to be going to stick with for at least a while. Took some small amount of time to get clarity on who would be governing in Tasmania. Dean Winter was then replaced as Labor leader by Josh Willey, who took great exception to the fact that the crossbench had chosen to support the Liberal Party to remain in office, did not support the no confidence motion. But given that they'd pretty much ruled out compromising on any of the issues at all that were important to the crossbench, doesn't really seem that surprising to me that they were not able to then attract the crossbenchers' support. We also had Netanyahu throwing a bit of a tantrum, Dave, attacking Albanese quite personally for daring to recognise the state of Palestine.
I mean, the guy, I guess, has been throwing a monumental tantrum in disastrous terms for a couple of years now. And it's all so deflating and depressing because all Anthony Albanese did was become 148th in line to do the bare minimum. So, Netanyahu can have his fit and he can fuck off as far as I'm concerned.
He did still find time to interview for an interview on Sky After Dark with Shari Markson, which I have to say I thought, given that he's enacting a genocide, is against the advice of his own military, is about to personally intervene in the takeover of Gaza City.
Joe, did you hear Shari Markson's quote, though, about what an opportunity? It's like being able to sit down with Winston Churchill as he's fighting off the Nazis. That is a very confused woman.
Yes, well, I don't think anyone's ever accused Shari of being anything other than confused. We also saw sorry, Jane.
I just wanted to quickly say what strikes me about Netanyahu's tantrum is that's what always happens when somebody feels insecure. And given the millions of Israelis that marched only a week or so ago against the war, and the fact that he is increasingly unpopular for very good reasons in his own country, it's interesting that he should claim that Albanese is weak when Albanese actually won with a landslide a second term and his popularity is going up. It strikes me that it is a classic right-wing play of whatever I accuse others of is in fact a disguised concession, and that's what we've seen in Netanyahu this week.
Well, yeah, and I think his popularity is likely to slump still further now that they are calling up 50,000 reservists to go and fight in Gaza. And we know already that a lot of the IDF, not all of them by any means, there are people who are starting to desert because they are so traumatized by what they're being asked to do. This is reservists, so people who are going about their business in Israel. You can't imagine that they are going to find that easy or desirable. So it will be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. Also, we saw this week that sort of phalanx of European leaders going to Washington to protect Zelensky from whatever Trump may have done next in the Oval Office. It was actually, in the end, quite an interesting, good meeting, you would have said, for Zelensky and Ukraine and Europe, where Trump had to get a bit of a reality check on his bromance with Putin. We're going to go to an interview now with Olga Oleinikova from the Ukraine Democracy Initiative. She'll give her perspective on Ukraine. Then we'll come back, a little bit of chat about that, and then we're going to get into the roundtable and what that all means. And Cameron has some strong views on that. So we'll go to Olga first. Olga Oleinikova, thank you very much for joining us on the Sunday Shot.
Yes, thank you, Joe, for having me.
So the first thing I just thought I'd ask, I know you're Australian, but born in Kyiv, so you must have friends and family on the ground there. How are they coping after 3 years of this terrible war?
Yes, I was born in Ukraine, in Kiev, and I lived there until I was 23. So all my, conscious life, so all my connections, school friends, university friends, because I finished university there, all Ukrainian. Many of them have left, though. Many of them have stayed. Some, still keep working in media space or agency work. They still remain in Kiev, despite war. They do some businesses as well, so they continue, which is fantastic, resilience that they show. I also have friends who are on the front line, like my age, who are fighting since the first, days of the war. Thank goodness, still alive, and in that, battlefield. I also have my family in Kiev. So I have my granddad. He's the only one who stayed. He's 88.
Wow.
And I go to visit him. He refuses to come to Australia because of age, and I respect that.
Sure.
So I try my best to go and visit him as much as I can. I've been in Ukraine 3 months ago, and I'm going again in November this year.
And what is it like when you're there in Kiev? I mean, we see photos on the TV, and there seems to be as much normal life continuing as is possible under the circumstances.
It's very surrealistic experience. People wake up at night at least 2 times because of sirens. Even in Kyiv, in other cities, the sirens play across the whole country because they don't exactly know where the missiles are fired, right? So as long as the missiles start, they record them on the border, and they don't know where it's landing. But all cities, they basically have the sirens on, so you can hear it no matter what, even if it will be explosion in the next, a second or minute. Still the siren is there. So they're typically at around maybe 12 a.m. and then 4 a.m. So when you are in a deep sleep. So imagine every night you wake up. I know many people who don't go to, bomb shelters. There are many people who still go to underground stations, or they have a shelters in their houses in the underground. But many of them, they don't go. My granddad, he doesn't go. He's a, child of war, I would say. It's his second war, which he is living through, right? He's 88. So he remembers, various times. Actually, I feel sorry for him that he has to experience this again when he's, 88, when he wants peace, comfortable life. So it's very surreal. You feel during the day, it's like regular life. Yeah, there are sometimes sirens during the day. Again, it depends. But at night it's just different, like a nightmare basically, which the cities, and the whole country is going into.
And you mentioned that some of your friends have actually gone to join the front line. So is that, everyday people who had no experience previously with the military in any way have just said, no, we're going to fight for our country, and have gone and had some sort of basic military training, or sort of out there on the fly, as it were? How has that been working?
Yeah, so I have a lot of friends who are serving, but I have some close friends. So one of my best friends, actually, since school time, he grew up, his background a little bit. So he grew up in city center, middle-class family, not poor family. He doesn't have to go to military to make money or anything. He worked in various jobs, from real estate, IT, like really like just a regular guy.
Yeah.
No, professional military experience, nothing. And then when the war started, he joined the military. And since then, he's been, promoted. He's built his military career. You see how life changes, right? People build military careers now in Ukraine, which I wish it was not the case. Then he also went to US for exchange, which is very interesting.
So what was he doing on exchange in the US? Was that to get further training?
Yeah. So he spent there, I think, half a year there. So he was exchanging the experience.
Yeah.
So he was sharing what is it actually to be on a, battlefield, because Russia and Ukraine, I think, would have one of the most maybe equipped armies at this stage who are practicing it every day. So they would be more experienced than, people who theoretically, have the understanding. So he said it was interesting to hear how old the generation of US, military, they overestimate Russia. They're scared of Russia, but the younger US as well military, they're let's say underestimating. They're saying, oh, we'll just go there, we'll win the fight. So he said very diverse perspectives are there. So he shared his experience, and then he just returned back home, had one day with the family after 6 months, and then went to front line.
So what was the relationship with Russia and Ukraine first like in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed and they became sovereign nations again?
We have similar, connections. We had same celebrities, music celebrities, we were listening to the same music, reading the same books. Ukraine has its own literature, of course, and in Ukraine, I was born in Kiev, and I went to Ukrainian schools. Every day, language would be Russian for my, friends in Kiev, and Kiev capital was Russian speaking. But again, state language Ukrainian, school Ukrainian, all essays, works, all in Ukrainian, dissertations in Ukrainian. So bilingual, I would say, easily. We shouldn't, disregard that 48% of all migrations from Ukraine, independent Ukraine, were done into Russia. So there's a lot of intermarriages between, the Russians and Ukrainians, a lot. So there's a lot of ties. And when the war started, it was a huge drama for many families. I don't have family in Russia, I have everyone in Ukraine, but I know there's so many dramatic family collapses because of that. But Ukraine is there's some similarities, but I think Ukrainians have different, a little bit different of a code, because we have a mixture of Western as well identity. We're more individualistic than Russians, I would say. They love more collective, actions. We would be more individualistic. But again, similarities are there. We grew on the same culture. We understand, I think, like Ukrainians understand Russians in a way, like not supporting maybe some ideas, but they understand the roots, like language and so on. So it's pretty sad that we ended up in this situation, because we're still neighbors, and hopefully, we can there'll be peace hopefully achieved, because it's a very horrible experience for both regular people, I would say, in Russia and in Ukraine. Regular, I'm not talking politicians, but regular families and regular people. It's a big drama. Drama is not the strongest word, but it's just horrible. The most horrible nightmare that could happen.
So Putin then annexed Crimea in 2014, the precursor to the war and the invasion of 2022. And initially, I think the West was cheering from the sidelines because Ukraine was doing very well and repelled the Russian forces from their second city, Kharkiv, seemed to be having some success on the battlefield. Whereas as the war has ground on for the last 3 years, there does seem to have been more of a stalemate, Russia getting the ascendancy again. Would that be a fair assessment?
Whatever the peace would be, it's hard to call anything as it will end as a win for Ukraine, right? We are having the war in our country. it's very it's very hard, topic, but yet to say like how it will end. Now we see that Zelensky stands on he doesn't want to give any territory back, but again, we need to be realistic. We understand that Russia would never say goodbye Donetsk or goodbye Zaporizhzhia Oblast or Lugansk, or he wouldn't go out of it, like it's not realistic.
But he is trying to negotiate to get more territory through the negotiation than he's actually ever been able to get on the battlefield around the Donbass. I mean, it's a big ask that he keeps asserting.
Well, definitely. You mean the Putin, right? You mean Putin?
Yeah, sorry, yes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. It was Ukrainian territory, right? And Ukraine has to be in its borders. I feel this, even discussions, we can see, a lot of attempts for peace talks, Trump, Putin talking regularly. I feel that because of the long-term Cold War, right, between US and Russia, they don't have enough things to bargain or to put the strings around. There's not that much connection, which they, US can't pull that. Okay, sanctions, but again, do they work? Yes, but still. It wouldn't finish the war. So US doesn't have enough strengths to make Putin do what Ukraine wants, what Western world wants, and Putin have nothing to offer Trump. So I feel that's why they're dancing around this whole thing, because they don't have enough strings to pull. They're not connected enough economically because of everything of the Cold War and the cold relationship for years. So that's why we're seeing these attempts, regular talks, but no one can push, no one can win, right, in this. Now we see there's another wave of talks. I know there was a lot of bad comments about how Trump looked badly, Putin win running the show in Alaska. I mean, yeah, but I feel such type of at least talking is much better than Third World War confrontation. People don't talk and fire each other, just missiles.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, it won't be successful tomorrow. Yes, Ukraine, here is again as a card as well. I feel, they was not invited even to the initial meeting where things were agreed. Now it looks like, hopefully Putin will meet Zelensky and they will agree to something.
Does Zelensky still retain the broad support of the Ukrainian people? Is he still popular as your leader?
Look, it's very hard to tell. It's very hard to tell because all this, opinion polls, people are scared to speak their mind. There's mass mobilization, which is happening. There's a lot of guys that sit locked in their houses. They're scared to go outside for 3 years, right? What are the mental health there like? I don't know. It's very horrible situation. So there's a lot of devastation with this forced mobilization or busification, right? They put them into buses and just drive them to frontline. People, what I read more now, that people talk more openly about how they escaped, how they ran away from the military bases, which they delivered. And I know personally a lot of stories like this. I was told when I was there from some friends, so I have access to these stories. And they're openly talking, so it's not... In the initial maybe year of the war, people were like, yes, let's defend Ukraine. But then, people are dying, Ukraine is not winning. And, is there anything that is worth a human life? Territory? Again, are we living in a 18th century, Orthodox mentality where, everything happens and linked to territory? That's what's happening, right? People are fighting for territory. Yes, it's important. I'm not saying that, we need to give up the territory.
No,
of course not.
Give it up willy-nilly,
but is it the price, that the guys are paying with their lives?
Do you think that the general malaise, which would be afflicting a population who's suffered under war for the last 3 years, do you think that there is now a mood to, as you say, give up some of the territory as it exists on the ground now, not necessarily the Donbass region that Trump wants, Putin, Putin wants, because that does leave Ukraine sort of exposed behind those lines, but that the idea of some kind of compromise around territory and land swap may be the ultimate solution?
Look, we need to be realistic and understand that there's a lot of investment as well happening already from Russian side to the territories that they captured, like Mariupol. Look at Mariupol. Remember this that was destroyed completely, like level to the ground. New high rises, they're building it like crazy. There's a lot of investments. Russian people live there. Like, I have some friends, not who live there, but who left, right? But they still have their old parents there, and the commercial and property are being rented there. People are starting businesses there. Mariupol, right? Look at that. So, I mean, Russia is already establishing life under their own rules in these territories. They will never, let's be realistic, will they give it up, the investment? No, right? So there are regions that probably, it's hard to push Putin to give up, like Mariupol, like, Donbass and others that they proclaimed already. I think they even had, I remember that meeting when they were shaking hands, and they claimed, they announced the territory of Russia now, right? Like Donetsk, not Zaporizhia, but Luhansk Oblast and others. So there's some territories which were officially like included in the constitution of Russia, right, as their own territory. So I don't know, can we, like, how realistic it is, right? To get it back without strong hand on battlefield, let's be honest. We're keeping the line, thank goodness, like still there, but look, war is advancing on our land, and we need to be realistic about it. So we don't have capacity to, to push backwards to the strengths that we would. That's why I think because more people are dying every day, and we're just losing territory every day. And the longer it continues, the more, the stakes are becoming. I hope Ukraine will get the peace made, hopefully on close terms that we want. And I'm watching it, so I'm actually looking what Putin will he, because Zelensky said, I'm going to meet. People are saying that Russia doesn't want peace and it's just delaying time, and maybe that's why Zelensky says, I'm so open, like let's move this conversation forward so we can understand exactly where Putin stands and Russia.
With Zelensky anytime soon, from what we've seen. The idea of giving back territory that he hasn't been able to take on the battlefield, I think, will never be accepted by Zelensky, or indeed by the European leaders, who very much see Ukraine as the front line for the imperial ambitions of Putin. So beyond what he wants to do with Ukraine specifically, but more generally having an enemy, as it were, encroaching in that territory. We kind of feel like we've seen this sort of thing before, Jane, have we not?
Yeah, who knew Trump would be Neville Chamberlain? I never picked the resemblance, but there you go. I feel like I'm living in my HSC essay, Causes of World War II. And that was one of the reasons why seeing that phalanx of European leaders with Zelensky in the meeting with Trump was actually really good, because that was a difference to what happened moving towards the Second World War. There is an awareness in Europe, perhaps, that isn't in America, that isn't in Australia, of what can happen, and Russian aggression. And, previously it was German aggression, but an understanding of fascist aggression and what that can do. And so I think the European countries understand more clearly the risks they're running. I was in Finland a year ago, and they are absolutely arming up. They are confiscating Russian-owned property in Finland, and have been doing that for a while. So there is a recognition, because Finland, of course, has the longest land border with Russia. And there is a recognition, I think, in Europe that they can't let this happen again. So it was fascinating listening to Olga and the personal view. I can completely understand war fatigue, and really just hoping against hope that there will be a great that there will be some sort of compromise that's workable. But I just don't believe it, even if there is a compromise, even if there is, peace in Ukraine headlines in a few months' time, Trump saying, right, give me my Nobel Peace Prize, please. After all, Obama got one, so I have to have one. I just don't believe that peace will last. I think if Putin gets what he's wanting, that will merely embolden him. And that is the problem with this situation. And I'm sure Zelensky has his imperfections and problems. Everybody does. But I do think for someone whose life work was a comedian to have turned into this really smart, subtle operator, the way he dressed for that meeting with Trump, the way he flattered Trump, the way he had the European leaders with him, I thought to myself, this guy is smart. He knows how to play this game. And that's why the Ukrainians have managed to withstand for so long. But yeah, it's a bloody mess. And I emphasis on the word bloody.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see. I think the question of security guarantees, which has come up, which could be anything from, more arms being provided to Ukraine, to European troops on the ground, what America might do. Those are the questions I think which we'll need to see unfold over the next week or so. Let's turn though to
Is Joe frozen for anyone else?
That took place this week, Cameron. It had gone from being called productivity roundtable to changing to the economic reform. Do you think that in itself was, and do you think that really anything much came out of it?
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, no, I haven't really seen much substantial come out of it. And in fact, I think, I'm not sure everyone even agreed on the premises that there was some productivity crisis. I mean, if we look historically, every decade we apparently have a new productivity crisis. We had, the 1980s. Why is construction productivity declining? The 1960s, there was a similar view. And I remember being at a conference of economists in 2012, lamenting Australia's terrible productivity. But back then, we were pointing the finger at Australia's terrible economic managers. Apparently, we didn't have enough MBAs. So you've got to put this roundtable in the context of the economic fashions and fads cycles. And we're definitely living through one. And the current fad is construction productivity. Apparently, despite being the world's leader in building the most houses every year, we've somehow forgotten how to build houses in the last 10 years. And it's completely puzzling. Doesn't fit the data. So it's a bit of a talk fest. And, fine, go and do it. Get people together. See if you can find consensus. But I'm not sure there's anything substantial. And when we look back on this in 10 years, we will definitely chalk it up as a bit of a talk fest that didn't really resolve anything.
Cameron, I guess when Joe said we were talking about this, I tuned out of the news this week. I was giving myself a little break after lots of writing about horrible things. So then I crammed yesterday. That was the option, or just, spiked my coffee this morning. So I crammed a bit yesterday. And I watched about 2.5 hours of coverage of this thing from the ABC. And I just heard buzzwords and obfuscation and deliberately making zero progress sound complicated and nuanced. And I didn't see anyone talking about like the fundamental problems that we all know are at the heart of our economy, that basically we're letting Gina Reinhart pilfer the place.
Well, I mean, if it's about productivity, the big, there's a few big secrets in productivity. Firstly, it doesn't matter who gets all the gains. Once you measure productivity, it all washes out. So that's sort of a separate question. And so by defining it as productivity, it sort of takes you away from should we have a better welfare state, and how should we do taxes and transfers in a fair way? It sort of says, no, we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about this other thing. Secondly, productivity itself is one of those meaningless buzzwords, right? It just says, we want to be richer. And no one disagrees that it's better to be richer as a country. we all disagree on how to get there and which winners and losers we create on the way, which is why it's so hard to get agreement, right? Like, if you have a look at, they've got these 10 easy wins, right? Road user charging is one of them. Don't know how that's meant to be productivity enhancing. It's not obvious to me that paying for your travel time by waiting in a traffic jam or by paying with dollars is better. Like, they're both a payment for waiting.
And also just on that road user charging, it seems to me that if we're trying to encourage people to make the change from gas guzzling cars, big utes to EVs, why add a disincentive to that in the name of fairness?
It's insanity.
Well, that's right.
Taxes without raising taxes.
Yeah.
And I think one of the arguments is that, if we raise revenue from fuel to fund roads and lots of people are buying cars that don't use fuel, we should, and those cars are probably heavier on average and still use the roads. Maybe we should charge by use. And, that's a conversation we should have. In 2050, when we look back, will we say that really helped our productivity? Not sure. That's sort of a fairness question and a revenue question, which are the important, interesting ones in economics. But it's sort of weird that came out of a productivity roundtable.
Cameron, I'm seeing heaps of, again, to just reiterate this theme, heaps of doubling down on the existing economic order. No real guts to face the problems and say, we need to do things extremely differently. I am seeing lots of tinkering. Is that your read around this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think most people want to radically change anything, though. I think we want a little bit of tinkering in our favor. So I'm not sure what you would change radically. I'm a big fan of incremental changes, bringing people along. There's a lot of good things in Australia. We get in the habit of complaining when we live in one of the richest countries in the richest point in human history. And we all say, oh, it's terrible these days. I mean, it's great. Doesn't mean we can do better, try harder, be fairer. And make those incremental tweaks, like how we fund roads or how we distribute to the elderly or the young or the families or whatever the case may be.
Jane. I think I'm going to have to disagree with you a bit there, Cameron.
We like a bit of healthy disagreement.
I think what we have, unfortunately, we know we have a much broadening gap between those who are enjoying the prosperity of this country and those who are definitely being shut out. That gap is growing. We now have food banks in Australia, and we have people going to those food banks who are full-time employment. That's not acceptable. That doesn't mean those families are benefiting from the prosperity. And my view of prosperity is this: if it doesn't benefit everyone, what's the point of it? If all prosperity is about is making people who already have things be able to get more things, then prosperity is a false god. It's a false goal. If we're not going to spread that prosperity more equally, and we are doing the exact opposite, we have I was listening to Gary Stevenson on the Versus Politics Leading podcast, which is fantastic. And he was talking about how we have to fundamentally change the tax system across the Western world. And in Australia, I think this is very clear because of what Peter Costello, the absolute horrendous rearrangement of who gets the benefits and undermining the tax system that he orchestrated, is we need to start taxing wealth more than wages, much more than wages. I mean, when, I don't know how many decades ago, but we had one person on, older person for every 20 taxpayers. It's now 3, it's now one older person for every 3 taxpayers. We are burdening young people, young families, and the poor, who the rate of unemployment benefit is beneath the poverty line. It is absolutely dreadful. And shout out to the 60% of single women over 60 who live in permanent income poverty, many of them facing homelessness. There are lots of people in this country who are doing it really, really badly.
So, Cameron, that was one of the So, go. I mean, that was one
let me just respond, because I don't, I mean, I disagree. I mean, you're not going to help poor people unless you're prosperous. So we do need, we can redistribute however we want in society, right? Yeah, but that's a political choice, right? We do have, like, we keep old people out of poverty with the pension. We keep the young people out of poverty. We do. It's very successful. I mean, look around the world. I'd rather be an age pensioner in Australia than just about anywhere. So the systems we have work, and we can argue about, should the pension be $5,000 more? Should youth allowance be an extra $100 a week? And that's fine. That's just incremental change, and that's sort of doing what you're saying. I definitely think that's a conversation we should have. But you're right that we aren't having it, and I'm very supportive. I think the welfare state where we redistribute to people to smooth out their lifetime income shocks is probably one of the greatest inventions of modern society. But we do have to endlessly have the conversation about what fairness means in that welfare state, and when we increment things up and when we don't, and what obligations people have within it. So I think I agree on that, but disagree that, prosperity is not therefore a goal unless it's shared. I think prosperity is a separate tangential goal, and in a prosperous society, how do we share it is a secondary part.
Isn't part of the problem across the Western world, though, that prosperity is by design not being shared equally? And more than that, it's not that we're seeking a redistribution downwards. It's the policies we have currently redistribute wealth upwards, and it's about re-gearing that. So there isn't so many people relying on food banks and that are sleeping cold in such a prosperous society.
I mean, look, there is no baseline from which we are redistributing up or downwards. There just is, right? And we can just argue about the degree to which the rules we've created, funnel the surplus to different parts of society. That's totally fine. I guess the other thing I wanted to pick up on Jane's point earlier is that, we can certainly tax wealth more. Totally fine. That's not that there is no world where that happens without consequence. And one of the consequences of wealth taxes is it makes taxing much more salient in people's minds than other types of taxes where we withhold the tax. So, for example, when you go to work, you don't see your tax, you get just paid the net. It just you don't get paid your gross salary and then have to send a bill to the tax agency, because that psychologically has a big effect. And in fact, some people argue that we should tax, for example, property and wealth, because it will make taxes more salient and make the people hate taxes even more and lead to a smaller state that raises less money and does less things, because the taxes you use for that are so salient. You have to send a bill every quarter to the tax office. Like, that's an argument people make. So I think we have to be much more cautious that, maybe we want to tax wealth, but we don't want to create the situation where people have to send bills every quarter. We want to do it in a much more hidden and tricky way. We want to pluck this goose in a way that does the redistribution without creating the general change in attitude that, hey, we want less taxes and less government. Because I actually think we do like it when the government functions well and does stuff. Most people love public hospitals. We love public roads. We love public schools. Like, so I don't want to risk it and just say, hey, make these people pay lots of taxes, because you might find that when the taxes become less hidden and more salient on their wealth, they push back even more against taxes. So you got to be a little bit smart about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it would be unusual for people to push back on paying more tax, but
it's
I think
what rich people do all the time.
Yeah, that did come out of the roundtable was through the focus on intergenerational inequity. So that was something that Jim Chalmers did trumpet as having been broadly agreed, that there was consensus that whatever the next developments in the tax system, which they're not going to do before the next election, it's going to inform the cabinet process and so on, does need to tackle this. Because as Dave says, is that it's not only that we are perhaps not distributing income fairly, but the tax system is rigged against the young at the moment. And that was the Grattan Institute's paper. And Aruna Sathinapali saying, households earning with the same income in retirement, say 100,000, versus young people who are at the stage of having families, paying mortgages, all of that, earning 100,000, paying twice as much tax as the older people. And that is because of very deliberate choices that we have made around superannuation, around capital gains, around the way that we treat family trusts, all of these sorts of things. So there does seem that to me and to many, that there needs to be a recalibration of the tax system. Now, how that's going to happen and in what form by a relatively timid government, who knows? But that certainly would seem to be baseline.
And also, as Richard Dennis points out, we have a situation where major mining companies and corporations pay less tax than students with HECS debts in this country. That is a gross distortion of the way a progressive tax system ought to work. There are many things that we need to look really carefully at, because I'm one of those people who does pay their tax as a small business proprietor, just the way you described, where I have to send the money off that I've already had in my account. I've got to pay my tax via my BAS every quarter. The pain is manageable. It's bearable. I can live with it.
Yeah,
I don't pay the taxes.
I mean, that's great. We still have to understand the average effect of these changes. So let me just pick up on what Joe said about the young versus the old and the wealthy versus the poor. Yeah, this is definitely true. We have this strange mindset in Australia where old age poverty is thought to be the biggest problem, and we have to design a superannuation system to solve that. And yet, when we look at the data, your typical 65-year-old on average earns more money than every person under the age of 30. So all the average ages up to like mid 30s, nearly 40, they earn less than when they're 65. And what's interesting is we created this superannuation system that says, no, the problem's the opposite. We need to take more of your money when you're under 30 or under 40 and take it from those ages to over 65 when you're going to be already richer. And so this is a real problem with the super system. In fact, I've proposed we should get rid of it if we actually care about young people, because the last thing we need is more redistribution from the young to the old, even if it's within a single person's lifetime. And yet what we've done is we've increased the compulsory contribution by 2.5%. So we've made everybody of working age 2.5% poorer currently, so that they can be slightly richer when they're older, which is the exact opposite of what you want. And I find it very, very odd that this isn't sort of questioned when it comes to this young versus old situation. On the mining, just quickly, I'm totally on board. I think the trick with mining and minerals in Australia is to get the royalty system right at the state level. And I've written a report recently for Prosper Australia, and we proposed essentially like the income tax system, a variable rate of royalties depending on the price of the mineral, which is what Queensland adopted in 2022 for coal and for gas. And Queensland's raised tens of billions of dollars more royalty revenue in the last few years because of that simple adjustment to create a much more commercial royalty pricing. And you can't dodge that with, profit shifting to your international headquarters or anything like that. And that's where there's plenty of scope for a much fairer tax system very easily within the current sort of institutions and rules. You just simply change one rate to a small table of rates and, raise, in my report, it was about 15 billion a year across the states just for 3 resources on average.
You can change one little number, but you're also having a situation where a parliament with 51-seat majority basically feels like their allegiance is to Woodside and Rio and all of the, as much as they feel it is to the next generation of people. So
it's really tricky, Dave.
I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? That picks up on some of the thinking around your book that you co-authored, Cameron, first as Game of Mates and then later as Rigged, is that it is, we do face a system within Australia with a regulatory framework where we've got lobbyists who are lobbying government to change regulations to benefit them and that is happening all over the place in key industries where government regulation is prime. So property development, mining, gambling, all of those sorts of things.
Yeah, like it's really tricky. And as you say, Dave, most of the time, the interests of the mining groups and the governments are aligned. And so it's very difficult. But it's quite interesting. The Queensland experience is that the Labor government, did almost the opposite of what's happening at this productivity roundtable. They didn't announce it. They didn't get people on board. They just announced it in the budget in May and said, please start paying us in June. And so they just did it, basically sent you the bill before anyone got organized to lobby against it. And it put the mining companies at the time in a tricky situation because they had to tell their shareholders that we're making record profits, the industry's booming, prices at record highs, and then somehow also organized to say, no, you're sending us broke with this extra tax. So if the political timing is right, these things will stick. And then the Queensland government got voted out, I think last year. So there's a new Liberal government in Queensland. And they've promised to keep the royalties because once it's in and once you've won that battle, it's a good revenue source. It's fair. It gets the people their share. And, it's very hard to reverse, I think, even though there's a new, lobbying campaign amping up. So I think the timing's got to be right. There are opportunities. And once the change happens, I think you can stick with it. But the last thing you want to do is start flagging this and saying, please organize against us. This is what we want to do to you. Go and create a new lobby group. Go and get your mates elected instead. You want to have, key people understanding the problem and keeping an eye out for when the timing is right.
I just want to
Sorry, Dave. I just want to say quickly that the timing clearly wasn't right when Wayne Swan tried to bring it in with Kevin Rudd and everything kind of blew up. And that does seem to be an opportunity that was lost.
I'm glad you brought that up, Joe. Do you remember that, for a very long period of time in the lead up to that election, our TV was almost entirely ads paid for by mining companies telling us not to vote for a particular political party. And I think that goes back to another reason why we really need to tax the absolute crap out of these oligarchs is that you let them get a certain degree of power, then that power subverts our democracy, and then it becomes even harder to tax these people. So it's a vicious loop that needs to be broken.
Yeah, definitely. The wealth buys political power. That's certainly true. But I think there's, this example probably is a bit of more evidence towards my incrementalism idea, and that we don't throw things out. We use the institutions and systems and the youth allowance and the pension and the taxes and welfare that we already have, because just changing one number inside a system that doesn't have to be substantially changed is kind of hard, much harder to argue against than, for example, Wayne Swan's resource super profits tax. Go and do a whole bunch of separate accounts and, all these things. It sort of just fuels the opposition, where if you just say, oh, we're just updating the existing thing, it's a CPI, cost of living adjustment, whatever the case, how do you say, oh no, we shouldn't adjust youth allowance to cost of living or CPI? Who's going to make that argument successfully? Whereas, if you do something too radical, you get this, it's a great big new tax thing. Now, people are going to argue anything, and they'll come up with catchphrases for a CPI adjustment to youth allowance as well. But I think, the average person out there is surprisingly sensible when they sort of see that nonsense on the media. So
I think I
would say that's an argument in my favor for the incremental change.
I think there is now much more cynicism in the population about the way that the oligarchs are carrying on. And it does seem to me that and whether that's because of, when you've got like Chris Richardson and Richard Dennis both arguing that there needs to be more revenue coming back to Australia from the exploitation and extraction of our resources, I think there is a consensus sort of building that, slight shift in the Overton window. And we've saw some of that also around this idea about taxing wealth, not work. And do you think, Jane, that that we are starting to see a shift, or is it still going to be, logic railing into the wind of a timid government?
Oh, there'll be a bit of that for sure. I do think that there is a shift. I think it was very interesting that when Chris Minns was running his election campaign in New South Wales, he was on and on and on about ending privatisation of public assets. I think that the effect of the metro in Sydney, which is a public asset, has really made people go, all this bullshit we've been hearing for decades, that the public sector can't do anything well and that only the private sector can do things well, is on the nose and is changing. And I think I always remember back to when John Howard said, we're going to have user pays, the classic neoliberalism thing. What people are now realising is what that meant was use pays. And so they are sick to death of every road being a toll road and the tolls going up constantly. People having to do long, winding ways to get to their place of work, particularly those on low wages who are really important. AMBOs, teachers, nurses, coppers, fireys can't afford to drive on toll roads to get to their place of work. We have seen the effects of privatisation of public assets, and I think there is an appetite. You can see it in New South Wales. I'm not au fait with what's going on in the other states to the same extent. That people,
we're basically communists down here. We're down.
That's good. That's good. I'm glad to hear it. I'm getting more and more left wing as I get older and older. I think because I've watched the depredations of the wealthy and the what is it? The banal, soothing tones of the corporations justifying their positions. And I am over it, and I'm too old to say otherwise. I think there is a real appetite for change.
Can I pick you up on that, Jane? That's really interesting because when the current government announced their Housing Australia Future Fund, right, it was really interesting that they decided not to invest in housing assets and rent them to people who don't have houses. They decided to invest in non-housing assets, the share market, bonds, etc. Whereas, when Kevin Rudd during the financial crisis wanted more public housing, he put $6 billion into the state public housing providers' hands. But what I find interesting is that other governments think that building housing in Australia is a good investment, right? So, for example, Australia's first build-to-rent project's called the Smith Collective on the Gold Coast, and it was the Commonwealth Games Athletes Village for 2018. And the Queensland government said, no, building houses for Queenslanders, because it was a build to rent thing after, that's a bad investment. We're gonna save everyone money by getting the private sector to do it. What's really interesting is who this private sector was. Was it this magical, innovation-led person, the amazing innovator? No, it was the Abu Dhabi Investment Council. It was a foreign government's investment fund. That government thought building houses to rent in Queensland was a good investment. The Queensland government thought it was a bad investment. Why? Right? So I think there's a real mental block there that sometimes doing things for people is a good investment, right? But there's one of these great tricks is that a thing you want to do as a government, that's called an investment. A thing you don't want to do, that's called a cost. It's just all word games, right? So I just find that you're right, Jane. People are sort of seeing through it and saying, hey, when I go to work at the government, I think investing in housing in Sydney's great. But at work, they say investing in housing in Sydney's a waste of money. Which is it?
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of extraordinary. When we've talked a bit about housing on the Sunday Shop before, and that coming out of the Second World War, like 25% of the houses that were being built and occupied by Australians were built by the government in the post-war reconstruction period. And that did not seem to, well, what that did do is put people in houses, which is surely the goal of a housing policy. One of the other things, Jane, sorry, go.
I'll be really quick, but I think one of the other things that is worth thinking about when we think about private versus public is private's mission is always to make money. Public's mission is to solve the problem that is affecting the society. In other words, what we're seeing in childcare at the moment is, I think, a direct result of the privatisation of that sector, because the mission of those childcare centres is to make money, not to care for children. Care for children is the means to make money. It's not the end. And that is why we need to, I'm not against private enterprise at all, but we need to look at where it's appropriate and where it's completely inappropriate.
Well, and that was part of the issue also to do with employment services and giving private sector the right not just to make lots of money out of people's unemployment, but then to punish them, to terminate payments, to suspend them, all of these things, which the consequences of which a private supplier doesn't think about at all, apart from potentially cost-saving measures. So, look, it seems to me that a lot of the big ticket items that were talked about in the lead up to the roundtable, things like trying to deal with the inequities with our tax system. If we're talking about productivity, people always say the best and most effective way to put us on a faster path to decarbonisation is a carbon tax. But there remain these silences in the debate, which the government enforces because of political timidity. Would you say that's the case, Cameron?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in the productivity roundtable, the most interesting thing that hasn't come up is immigration, which is in the last 2 years has been, twice or three times the rate it was in the 1990s. And of course, if we think productivity is output per person, we keep putting more people in, it's going to be very hard to increase. And we've actually seen, for that reason, measured productivity falling in a lot of countries post-COVID when borders were reopened. And you can see there's a lot more sort of frustration in the community out there. I think most Aussies support moderate rates of immigration, but for some reason, that one was sort of skipped. We want to replace human labor with machines and do things more efficiently.
AI was a big topic of conversation coming from all sorts of different directions.
That's really what productivity means, isn't it? How do we extract more cash with paying fewer people for having done that? It's a very neoliberal framing for a meeting of business heads and government in 2025. Fills me with hope for the future.
Now we are. Sorry, Cameron, did you want to respond?
No, I just think it's, one of the things I think is that sort of we don't grasp is that when we become more productive and we become fairer, it means that, human services become very expensive. It becomes very expensive to have someone mow your lawn or look after your kids, because that person can earn nearly as much as everybody else, right? And so there's a bit of a conflict between high productivity and fairness across society and sort of the status ranking we get when we can outsource our chores to low-paid service workers. That's a sort of unequal, highly productive society where that happens. And I see this in the US. Everyone says, yeah, we want everyone to get paid more, but I definitely still need a housekeeper and all this. And I'm like, well, if everyone gets paid more, you probably can't have that. You might have to mow your own lawn and cook your own lunch.
Well, it was interesting.
I think there's some psychology there as well.
There is, and a lot of the white South Africans that have come in under, Trump's new policy where they're good refugees, like Dutton tried to espouse, they've found it quite shocking because they've actually had to, pay staff at all in various ways. Now, we have got a hard out today at 10 a.m. because Cameron has to zip off to another engagement, so no kind of ill discipline just chatting on till 10 past 10 today. So I'm going to go to people's top tips. Jane, we didn't actually get much of an opportunity to dive into education, which I know is a subject very dear to your heart, and how that was pretty much ignored at the roundtable, despite being really a source of much debate in the community at the moment, both at a secondary and at a tertiary level, with all sorts of just horror wreaking havoc in our universities. But that aside, there'll be another opportunity to talk about that, I'm sure. We'll have you back. But your top tip for this week?
Well, it is an article in the Sydney Morning Herald about the appalling system of labour hire for people on farm workers. And what's happening there is almost a kind of indentured slavery. We really need to look more closely at that kind of thing. But I do want to quickly grab my moment to say, shout out to TAFE as well, which has been completely decimated. That has a huge effect on productivity. And Australia now has one of the most segregated school education systems in the Western world. And that segregation, that concentration of disadvantaged kids in disadvantaged schools is growing at the second highest rate. This has a huge effect on productivity. It does not get spoken about ever.
No, it's one of those choices that the Australian government is making that now seems to have just been kind of calcified into the way things are, as opposed to the choices that we're making that result in these sorts of
Nowhere
outcomes.
else in the world, except
Nowhere else.
2025 is on the case to get there.
Well, there we go. Cameron, your top tip for this week.
Oh, I don't really know what top tips are meant to be, but I can tell you if you want to be challenged. I wrote an article on Fresh Economic Thinking a little while back, and the title is "We Don't Know If Housing Construction Productivity is Rising or Falling," and that sort of digs into the question. You hear a lot that it's terrible, it's falling. But if you actually dive in and try and measure it, I don't think we really know. We're basing a lot of these concerns on sometimes just measurement error and misapplication of economics.
Oh, well, that's interesting. I think a lot of that came out of Canberra's obsession at the moment with Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein's abundance, which is all what we just keep hearing people talk about again. And that is about, too much regulation is resulting in lengthy delays, and we're just not getting much done. So it's a zeitgeist kind of zinger, I think, perhaps more than, as you say, something which is underpinned by rigorous data here. Dave, your top tip for this week?
Today, in an hour or two, there is a nationwide march for Palestine. Be there if you can, and remember that what's happening in Gaza is an establishment experiment on the rest of humanity, and what they will do to Palestinians, they will eventually do to you too. So get out and show support.
Okay, thank you. That is happening all around the country, 1:00 here in Sydney. Thank you all very much for joining us on this week's Sunday Shot. As ever, if you like what we do subscribe to our channel. It keeps the tech bros happy. And if you can, a few dollars our way too, because we're heading towards the end of August and we've still got a little bit of money to make to crack our nut for this month.
Gotta get a different metaphor, Joe.
That is the metaphor. You have a monthly nut that you have to, that's it.
Yeah, okay. We'll talk off stream.
Okay, we'll go offline. We'll find something. We'll find another way of saying, please give us a bit more money. Ronnie Salt has just posted an article on the Shot website. Get into that. And we look forward to seeing you next week on the Sunday Shot.
See ya.
Bye.